Levantaos, hombres de Cabo Rojo. Levantaos, puertorriqueños. Levantaos, mujeres de Puerto Rico. Rechazad el cortejo de los cobardes. Rechazad el cortejo de los traidores de la patria. Los que no aman la patria son indignos de la mirada dulce de una gran mujer nacida en la tierra.
Why does the U.S. have strict immigration laws, yet forcefully enter other nations, not as visitors or workers as immigrants do, but to take over and exploit? That contradiction lies at the heart of one of America's most uncomfortable truths. Welcome back to Facts on Trial. Today, it's easy to forget that the United States still has colonies. Imagine saying that in 2025. The idea of colonial masters in 2025 is just wild and very, very wrong. But we don't say that out loud. Instead, we use terms like unincorporated territory or Commonwealth. These are just euphemisms, linguistic camouflage, to cover what is, in essence, control without full representation. And among these places, one stands out: Puerto Rico. When you're in Puerto Rico, it looks like the US, the highways, the fast food, the American flags, but it also doesn't. The Spanish language, the architecture, the culture, it's something else entirely. That in-between feeling? That's by design. It's not an accident. It's the result of a century-long policy of control. So let me show you how the United States kept its grip on this Caribbean island, with economic warfare, surveillance, and even psychological manipulation. In 1898, as the dust settled on the Spanish-American War, Puerto Rico woke up under new management. The Spanish flag came down. The American one went up. The U.S. had framed the war as a mission to liberate Cuba from Spanish tyranny. But when the cannons stopped firing, it wasn't just Cuba. The U.S. walked away with Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. It didn't free these places, it took them. This wasn't just war spoils, it was strategy. The U.S. wanted naval bases, sugar, markets, and manpower. Empire was the goal, just not by that name. And Puerto Rico wasn't the first, and it wouldn't be the last. The U.S. had already laid groundwork in Hawaii, where American businessmen and Marines overthrew the sovereign Hawaiian kingdom in 1893, just 5 years earlier. Queen Liliuokalani was forced from the throne. The annexation was never put to a public vote. Native Hawaiians resisted, protested, but Washington moved forward anyway. By 1898, Hawaii too was under U.S. control. Across the Atlantic, Liberia stood as a different kind of outpost, technically independent, founded by freed American slaves. But from the beginning, the U.S. shaped its leadership, its economy, even its military. U.S. corporations like Firestone turned Liberia into a rubber empire. During the Cold War, it became a staging ground for American intelligence and military power in Africa. The U.S. didn't always need to raise a flag. Sometimes, it just needed the land, the labor, or the leverage. This is the story of how the U.S. stole Puerto Rico. On a quiet Tuesday in San Juan, Spanish rule ends. The U.S. takes control. No outcry, no fanfare, just a flag changing hands on a governor's balcony. But this wasn't liberation. It was a takeover. American politicians like Theodore Roosevelt, then Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and Senator Henry Cabot Lodge were unapologetically expansionist. Roosevelt warned, "Do not make peace until we get Puerto Rico." Lodge replied confidently, "Puerto Rico is not forgotten." After the Treaty of Paris, President William McKinley rejected Spain's offer to keep Puerto Rico, declaring unequivocally, "Puerto Rico is to become territory of the United States." General John R. Brooke then becomes military governor, seizing land, ports, and military installations. Within months, Spain's autonomy plan, months in the making, dies on the vine. The U.S. Congress passes the Foraker Act in 1900, which gives Washington full control over Puerto Rico's political system. American officials, mostly white, English-speaking men who had never set foot on the island, were appointed as governors. Imagine a purely Spanish-speaking immigrant ruling over America. What would be the outcome? Will that ever happen? Will they let it happen? Of course not. It is going to result in a massive outburst from Americans. How do you justify the acts if these men enslaving generations due to their greed in the name of politics? They never understood anything about these people or their culture. To them, it was just a cash cow, another everyday business company. One of them, Charles Herbert Allen, was particularly opportunistic. After governing Puerto Rico, he returned and used his connections to found what would become the largest sugar empire on earth, Domino Sugar. When he was the leader of Puerto Rico, he gave public Puerto Rican funds to American-owned businesses on the island. Then he stacks the government with American loyalists. And then eventually he resigns, but then he returns to the island to build a sugar kingdom. Now, with the help of all of the political officials that he had appointed, this company catapults into the largest global sugar business on earth. Meanwhile, U.S. banks arrive. They offer loans to struggling Puerto Rican farmers. Then they jack up interest rates, foreclose on the land, and convert it into sugar plantations. Land owned by Americans, worked by Puerto Ricans, for the profit of Wall Street. By 1930, 80% of all arable land in Puerto Rico was owned by absentee corporations, and nearly all of it was devoted to just one crop, sugar. Puerto Rico, at this point, is slowly turning into this sugar island, this labor camp, and becoming more and more dependent on shipments from the mainland. The U.S. enacts the Jones Act of 1917, a new policy that says that anything going into Puerto Rico has to be transported by American ships with American crews. A monoculture economy, designed for export, controlled by foreign hands. So of course this skyrockets the prices for locals in what was called the cabotage monopoly, which is made worse by the fact that the US government had devalued and then outlawed the local currency. So now every Puerto Rican lost almost half of their wealth overnight. And as a part of this push to lock Puerto Rico in as their colony, they forbid Spanish in schools and public institutions. And so in this very short amount of time, the US turned Spain's former colony into this giant sugar farm, stripping down local identity and language and culture in the process, and locking the people under their control. That's not a coincidence. That's colonialism. Something we expect to be a thing of the past, but it's very unfortunate this is happening till date. Another section of the act made Puerto Ricans US citizens, but not out of generosity. It was 1917. World War I was raging, a draft was coming. And suddenly, 18-year-old Puerto Rican men were eligible. So Puerto Rican men and teenagers got sent to the front lines to fight for the country that was in the process of pillaging their island. 20,000 Puerto Ricans served in World War I. Many more in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. They could die for America, but they couldn't vote for its president. Just think about fighting for your enemy's enemy, while they destroy your home and seize your properties. The fact that all the able-bodied men went away to defend America on the front lines left little or no resistance as they took over the territory completely. Control extended, way beyond laws. It went deep into identity and culture. In schools, English was enforced as the primary language, even though less than 20% of Puerto Ricans spoke it fluently. Spanish was banned in public education until 1948. Textbooks were shipped in from the US. Puerto Rican history was erased or rewritten. It was a cultural cleansing effort, and it nearly succeeded. The goal was assimilation, not partnership, not equality, just obedience. In 1922, a series of Supreme Court cases had solidified Puerto Rico as a, quote, unincorporated territory, which is just another sneaky way to say the US Constitution doesn't fully apply here. Just think about this. Unincorporated territory, this intentionally contradictory statement that came from these American men hundreds of miles away. But honestly, the message was very clear. Puerto Ricans did not look or sound enough like Americans to actually be a part of the United States. By the 1930s, big banks owned 60% of these sugar farms, 80% of the tobacco farms, and 100% of the railroads and shipping facilities. At the same time, Puerto Ricans were being paid less than 4 cents an hour. If you put that into today's currency by inflation, that's like $1 an hour. Poverty and malnutrition start to grip this island. All the while, the US is turning the island into an essential military outpost. See how Puerto Rico stretches out a little bit into the Caribbean? It served as a strategically positioned island to help protect trade routes and a place where you could refuel ships. Over time, more and more military bases and installations start to pop up on this island. The US would go on to test thousands of bombs in Puerto Rico, leaving behind one of the most hazardous waste sites. Then came a man named Cornelius Rhoads, an American doctor sent to Puerto Rico in the 1930s to study anemia. Instead, he left behind something far more sinister. He goes on to say that it makes him sick to, quote, inhabit the same island with them, but he doesn't stop there. And he said Puerto Ricans were something to totally exterminate the entire population. And then he admits to a crime. He says, I have done my best to further the process of their extermination by killing off 8 and transplanting cancer into several more. This is awful. It's really awful, but for a lot of Puerto Ricans, this wasn't surprising. So the staff at the hospital find this letter and they send it around to everyone. And it goes out and it goes viral. And nothing happens to this guy who has admitted to murdering a bunch of Puerto Ricans. Rhoads was never prosecuted. Actually, something does happen. He gets on the front cover of Time magazine. In fact, he went on to help found the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission and played a key role in American cancer research. To many Puerto Ricans, this wasn't a shock. It was confirmation America didn't just exploit the island. It viewed its people as disposable. To the nationalist, just everyday, ordinary Puerto Ricans who are fed up with being exploited and wanted to do something about it rather than complain, this letter confirms something that they already knew. It actually wasn't that surprising. There was an awareness that, yes, America loves Puerto Rico for their soil and their labor and their strategic location, but hates them as people. So after this letter, the movement explodes. The nationalist movement took shape, led by this guy, Pedro Albizu Campos. Campos was everything the US hated and feared in a colonial subject. He was brilliant, educated at Harvard, spoke multiple languages, served in World War I, and came back with a singular goal: Puerto Rican independence. But soon, Campos would find himself bouncing in and out of prison for 25 years. Things haven't quite escalated. This movement is just starting. Campos comes back to Puerto Rico with the goal of total separation from the United States, and people join him. A lot of people were beginning to support him.
¿A qué temor? ¿A qué se teme? ¿Quiénes son los yanquis para temerles? ¿Por qué temerles? Aquí acaba de desfilar 3 jóvenes que han desafiado el ultraje de ese imperio que quiere imponer el servicio militar obligatorio sobre nosotros.
It gets to the point where the US and their fake government on the island can no longer ignore this movement. Soon, a bunch of new officers are hired and trained and armed with machine guns and tear gas. But the nationalists keep fighting. Then in 1935, police kill 4 nationalists at a university event. The nationalists retaliate by killing the police chief. The US responded with force. Without trial, the police execute his killer and arrest Campos, the leader of the movement, for plotting to overthrow the government. Campos is given this rigged trial with a jury made up mostly of mainland Americans. And he gets sentenced to prison for 10 years. In 1937, on Palm Sunday, a peaceful march in Ponce ended in a massacre. Police opened fire. Over 100 wounded, women, children, elders, shot in the back as they ran. But the violence only radicalized the movement. Back in Washington, D.C., they're starting to get worried that this independence movement is just going to keep building. And they don't want to give up their island in the Caribbean. There's still plenty of money to be made off of Puerto Rican soil and labor, not to mention the military bases that they have there. So they turned to an extreme measure. By the 1940s, Puerto Rico had become the site of one of the most expansive domestic spying operations in U.S. history. The FBI, along with Puerto Rico's local police, created a secret program. Folders, files, surveillance dossiers on over 100,000 people. They tracked your car, your phone calls, your letters. They knew who you were dating, who you owed money to, who your kids were friends with. Like, they got really detailed. They started listening in on phone calls and intercepting letters. Everything was fair game. The idea was to create panopticon, this idea that they're always watching. they also started to cultivate relationships with a network of informers. The victim's family or friends or neighbors would get sucked into this state spying apparatus. The FBI uses payments and coercion and manipulation, which often forces people to turn on each other, causing divorce and broken friendship and fractured communities. Much of this was done undercover. Like, these FBI agents would just be dressed in normal clothes, but would be constantly surveilling the people around them. And they took account of all this. They documented everything. If you are a person of interest, you probably had a file. All of these files, they're called las carpetas, almost like a blacklist. And if you had a carpeta, you couldn't get a job, or housing, or a passport. Some were even blackmailed or had their families torn apart. It was psychological warfare. Detailed descriptions of the locations where people are just meeting. All of the names of people involved. These subgroups that were potentially supporters of the independence movement. You get these highly detailed physical descriptions of the people that they were tracking. Their occupation, the model of their car, their license plate number, and all of their moves, all of their activities, what they were doing, who they were supporting, and even for those who moved away from Puerto Rico, they continued to track them. Knowing exactly what apartment they lived in the Bronx. They speculated about their nationalistic tendencies. And then you see these interviews that agents were having with people close to the target, where their personal beliefs are revealed, like one who thought that Puerto Rico would be repaired with socialism and independence. In all of these documents, you see an obsession with who had guns. It's hard to overstate how exhaustive this spying effort was. A surveillance state so extreme, it rivaled East Germany's Stasi in scale and paranoia. And it lasted for 50 years. In 1950, the nationalists snapped. They staged a revolt, took over several towns, cut phone lines, tried to assassinate the governor. They even launched an assassination attempt on President Truman when he downplayed one of the worst acts of terrorism committed by the US government. They knew they couldn't win, and this was 1950. Like the United States is easily the most powerful country to have ever existed. These people had no chance of winning against the newly crowned global superpower. That wasn't the point. They wanted the world to know. They wore their best dress when they went out to fight because they might not come back alive. The US responded with bombs, the only time in history the US has dropped bombs on its own citizens. Over 3,000 Puerto Ricans were arrested. Campos was jailed again, and this time, according to some reports, subjected to radiation experiments that left him paralyzed and silenced until his death. The resistance quieted, but the control continued. In the 1970s and 80s, Puerto Rican women were subject to mass sterilization campaigns, often without full consent. By the end of it, over 1/3 of all women on the island had been sterilized, the highest rate in the world. Meanwhile, the island's economy was rebuilt around tax loopholes for US corporations, which were later revoked, triggering a depression. And to this day, they remain an unincorporated territory, which means that they don't have the same rights as other American citizens. When Puerto Rico declared bankruptcy in 2016, the US didn't send aid. It sent a fiscal control board, unelected, unaccountable, and with sweeping power over the island's economy. Austerity returned. Schools were closed, pensions were cut. It was economic colonialism in modern form. Puerto Ricans are US citizens. They serve in the military, pay into Social Security, but they can't vote for president. They have no voting representation in Congress. And yet, Puerto Rico has shaped American culture. From salsa and reggaeton to food and fashion, this small island has given more to America than America has ever given back. Every time a hurricane hits, and aid is slow to arrive. Like after Hurricane Maria, this colonial relationship showed its cracks. US aid was slow, minimal, and bureaucratic, as if Puerto Ricans deserved less because of their ambiguous status. Every time Wall Street firms buy up the coastline to build luxury condos, every time Puerto Ricans ask for dignity and are met with silence, we're reminded that this isn't equality. This is colonization, which has been condemned globally. Puerto Rico is seen as a colony, one the US took in war, exploited for over a century, and has kept using every method short of calling it what it is. We forget. We're encouraged to forget about the status of this place very often, or its history. But for the people of Puerto Rico, this history isn't past, and it's a wound still healing, or maybe never allowed to heal. Puerto Rico was never liberated. It was seized. It was shaped through extraction, militarization, cultural control, and surveillance. What was framed as liberation was really empire building in disguise. This has been Facts on Trial, uncovering truths history tried to bury.
Amados hermanos, a cada generación toca recoger las cenizas de sus mayores. Aquellos que no veneran la ceniza de sus mayores son los verdaderos muertos, los que se extinguen en el cosmos porque son indignos de la personalidad humana. Toca a nosotros este inmenso privilegio, con la devoción que nos une en el culto inmenso de la patria, en un momento crítico de su historia. Es el momento resolutivo de la patria. Estamos cansados de aguantar con paciencia una esclavitud denigrante. Estamos aburridos de la presencia de un despotismo y de todos sus símbolos. Nos da asco la presencia de hombres y mujeres que pretendan asumir autoridad en nuestra patria sin recibir el nombramiento de Puerto Rico. Estamos cansados de todo eso. Y estamos en la resolución de desafiar definitivamente toda esa tiranía. Aquí tenemos toda esta niñez llena de gloria, toda esta juventud llena de valor, todas estas damas llenas de belleza y que llevan en sus entrañas toda la grandeza de nuestra patria. Aquí venimos nosotros con la generosidad en los actos sublimes de heroísmo y de sacrificio que han de consagrar la independencia de Puerto Rico. Los muñecos que nos pasea por delante el enemigo, algunos nacidos en Puerto Rico, otros nacidos en Yanquilandia, esos muñecos no nos impresionan. Son muñecos que como muñecos pasan y que el enemigo desprecia después que los descabeza. Los sienta en su falda, les hace hablar su idioma, les hace hablar su palabra, les hace decir lo que mejor les conviene. Y cuando se cansa de tenerlo sentado en su falda, lo descabeza. Ha llegado un momento, es vuestro momento. Esta generación nuestra tiene un inmenso privilegio. El privilegio de sentirse fastidiada de la esclavitud. El privilegio de desafiar la esclavitud. El privilegio de desafiar la tiranía. ¿Cómo renunciar a nuestra grandeza? ¿Por qué sepultarnos en un mundo de inmundicias, en un mundo de codicias materiales, en un mundo de sobornos, en un mundo de esclavos? ¿Por qué no se levanta ese pueblo a la grandeza que le llamó el padre la patria? ¿Dónde estamos? Estamos en Cabo Rojo. Aquí, como dijo el gran poeta hace un instante, se estremeció la tierra para que surgiera de ella un pétalo, para que surgiera de ella un capullo que debía ser la flor preciosa del alma más grande de la patria, del alma de Betante. ¿Dónde están los corazones aquí? ¿Dónde están los grandes de este pueblo? ¿Dónde están las hijas grandes de este pueblo que podían ser la Virgen de Betante? Porque en él corrió el riesgo de su prisión, corrió el riesgo de la muerte, para que ella, sus restos, vinieran aquí, a ser sepultados aquí, a fecundar con su espíritu nuestros corazones y nuestras memorias y nuestra resolución para ser dignos de la escala de una gran mujer así de nuestra patria. ¿Dónde están los hombres de Puerto Rico que toleran toda su humillación sobre sus mujeres y sobre sus hijos? merecen estos hombres, tan bellas mujeres, tan virtuosas mujeres. El amor nos exige algo más que la complacencia, que la gentileza, que la generosidad de un dote o la generosidad de un regalo. El amor exigirá la vida entera. Y la vida entera nos lleva a hacer respetar la dignidad de una mujer, la dignidad de una madre, la dignidad de sus hijos, la dignidad de toda su posteridad. Levantaos, hombres de Cabo Rojo. Levantaos, puertorriqueños. Levantaos, mujeres de Puerto Rico. Rechazar el cortejo de los cobardes. Rechazar el cortejo de los traidores de la patria. Los que no aman la patria son indignos de la mirada dulce de una gran mujer nacida en la tierra. El imperio no quiere ceder. El imperio yanqui es bruto. ¡Bruto! Es un imperio regido por hombres cínicos y brutos que se creen que porque poseen una bomba atómica pueden sentarse sobre la cabeza de todos los seres humanos. Es un poder que no respeta nada más que la fuerza bruta. Aquí han tropezado con la fuerza del espíritu y van a tropezar también con toda la fuerza que la fuerza del espíritu puede generar. La bomba de hidrógeno y todas las bombas que el hombre pueda fabricar no tienen la potencia que tiene en el campo físico mismo la voluntad de un corazón heroico. El heroísmo de una sola mujer y el heroísmo de un solo hombre pueden estremecer en su cimiento al imperio más poderoso. Pueden derrumbarlo y humillarlo y aplastarlo. Y esa fe y esa conciencia es la que nos debe mover a nosotros. ¿A qué temor? ¿A qué se teme? ¿Quiénes son los yanquis para temerles? ¿Por qué temerles? Aquí acaba de desfilar 3 jóvenes que han desafiado el ultraje de ese imperio que quiere imponer el servicio militar obligatorio sobre nosotros. Temor al destierro, al presidio, al calabozo, a la muerte. Todo eso es preferible a ser esclavo. Pero es la hora también de imponer las sanciones físicas y las sanciones morales a la canalla que quiere imponerse en nuestra tierra. Sean nacidos aquí o sean yanquis traídos aquí. Esto es nuestro. Aquí están las cenizas de vuestras abuelas. Aquí están las cenizas de vuestros abuelos. Aquí está todo el amor de los que fundaron esta patria, de los que sembraron estos preciosos árboles, de los que levantaron esos monumentos, de los que levantaron vuestras iglesias, de los que levantaron las tumbas, de los que levantaron la pila bautismal para que nosotros recibiésemos la bendición y la luz del cristianismo. ¿Cómo vamos a renunciar a todo nuestro pasado de grandeza? ¿Por cobardía? ¿Cómo vamos a entregar todo nuestro legado de heroísmo y de valor? ¿Por qué? ¿Cómo vamos a entregar la sabiduría de nuestra raza, la belleza de nuestra raza, la visión eterna de nuestra raza? ¿Con qué derecho se nos quiere llevar a nosotros a ser los gusanos de la tierra, a ser la cabalgadura de una bestia como la son los yanquis? ¿Con qué derecho? Y aquí hay que levantar las sanciones más duras y más severas contra todo el que sirva de instrumento a la tiranía, contra todo el que quiera venir aquí a ejercer fuerza o autoridad en nombre del gobierno de los Estados Unidos. Aquí nadie tiene derecho a ejercer ninguna autoridad que no emane directamente de Puerto Rico. Y los yanquis no quieren que Puerto Rico se constituya en una nación libre, soberana, independiente. Y hasta tanto Puerto Rico no sea libre, soberano, independiente y confiera autoridad a alguien, nadie tiene ninguna autoridad en Puerto Rico. ni jueces, ni fiscales, ni policías, ni gobernadores, ni ningún charlatán en Puerto Rico. Aquí vamos a levantar el corazón en alto y la voluntad ferra, inconmovible. Nosotros no estamos desafiando a nadie, nos están desafiando continuamente. La tiranía yanqui en todas partes, esta bandera yanqui en todas partes en Puerto Rico, esa sombra de muerte donde quiera que cae. Nos están desafiando, son 52 años de esclavitud que lleva este pueblo. 2 generaciones que se han levantado a la sombra de la esclavitud. La obra de Betances casi destruida, la obra de Lares casi destruida. En Lares se proclamó como primer acto de la República la abolición de la esclavitud. Los yanquis en el 98 vuelven a restaurar la esclavitud, no ya de los negros, sino de los negros, de los blancos, de todos los puertorriqueños. Anulan, pretenden anular la personalidad de Puerto Rico. Y han llegado al colmo de que nos presentar ahora como una comunidad de yanquis. Nosotros los caborrojeños, una comunidad de yanquis. ¿Quién es yanqui aquí en Cabo Rojo? Pues eso dicen los alicates, los yanquis aquí. Que nosotros somos yanquis. Imagínense usted. De esos títeres en San Juan, hablando de que esto es una comunidad de yanquis. Me parece que esos señores hay que darle una recepción muy amable cuando vengan a Cabo Rojo. Las cuantas piedras por ahí, es bueno que las vean siquiera cerca de la nariz para que entiendan la verdad y respeten este pueblo. Es la hora de la resolución. El momento de intranquilidad del hombre es el momento en que está irresoluto, en que no sabe qué hacer. El miedo en el hombre es cuando no sabe qué hacer. Tiembla la mujer cuando no sabe qué hacer. El valor no necesita de la fuerza física. La mujer más endeble puede derribar un imperio si tiene valor. Que empuñen su rosario, que se inspiren en lo eterno. Y las mujeres nuestras serán las que empujarán los hombres hacia los hombres gloriosos para que han nacido. Las mujeres de Puerto Rico no han parido hombres cobardes. Tienen que ser hombres que sean genuinos héroes para la historia del mundo. Cuando el poeta habla, oigamos en la voz de la belleza, en la voz de lo adorable, en la adoración que está entre nosotros. Algo divino ha surgido en su presencia. Oigamos. Aquí está la ceniza de metal. Aquí está, tiene que estar el corazón de todos los puertorriqueños. Aquí tiene que estar el valor de todos los puertorriqueños. Aquí tiene que estar el heroísmo de todos los puertorriqueños. Aquí tiene que estar lo más grande y noble de la sangre de Puerto Rico. Aquí tiene que estrellarse el despotismo de los Estados Unidos.